This is a video about willpower, how it can be lost, and how you can regain it. What I'm about to tell you over the next 20 minutes or so was acquired over 40 years as a psychologist, helping people with all sorts of addictive disorders get out of their various traps. Addiction means that you've lost control over your use of an incentive, such as drugs, alcohol, food, pornography, gambling, or any other bait that promises immediate gratification. You're said to be dependent upon an incentive when it doesn't matter what you say. What determines your choices is your motivation to use the incentive. The power of your will is determined by how much of this incentive motivation you can tolerate and still remain true to your word. You only become aware of your willpower during these moments of conflict. To break free of an addictive trap, you have to go beyond promises and actually perform the way you intend to perform during crises of stress and temptation. By the end of this video, you'll know how to increase or decrease your willpower. How you use this knowledge is ultimately up to you. Your power to control future behavior with a commitment made in the present is what I call willpower. I'll use New Year's resolutions to illustrate the point. Now, if you have a history of making resolutions, you know how they tend to play out. At some point, a situation arises in which local stresses or temptation have a greater influence over your actions than the commitment you made on New Year's Day, and you violate it. Invariably, that first violation leads to subsequent violations, and the resolution is dead. Much more damaging than the relapse is the damage done to your belief that you do what you say you will do. This is how you lose willpower. And willpower is the power of your intentions to determine your actions. Now, just as willpower can be lost by failing to honor your commitments, willpower can be won by honoring your commitments. Here is a clinical tale that may illustrate some aspects of your challenge. When I first met Ernest, he said he was an alcoholic and his drinking was out of control. And he was out of control, because the only source of control you have is to intend to behave in a certain way and then to behave in that way. I vowed to quit drinking 1,000 times and failed 1,000 times. This was Ernest's drinking pattern. After he left work, he would stop at a convenience store and get a six-pack and start drinking in the car. And then he was off and running. No telling where he'd wind up that night. He'd wake up the next morning feeling like crap and vow he wouldn't do that again. Now, I'd like you to consider Ernest's conflict as he drove past the convenience store. Pulling him in one direction was the desire for the cold drink and relief from the stresses of the day. Pulling him the other direction was the commitment he made the week before. So what's your prediction? Will Ernest's behavior be dependent upon his solemn vow or on the availability of the incentive? Ernest is diagnosed as alcohol dependent because it doesn't matter what he says or vows to. His behavior is dependent upon the influence of alcohol, not the influence of his commitment. So how did Ernest become dependent? Well, you can imagine that the first time he vowed to quit drinking, he took the commitment seriously. But his word lost its magic when he violated it the first time. Once he set precedent that he can vow to quit drinking and then drink, subsequent vows had less power. Each time he violated his commitment, he took his commitment less seriously. By the time I saw him, his vows to quit drinking meant nothing. The point of making a commitment is to freeze your motivation to do the right thing, so that your future behavior is influenced by this intention rather than by local temptations. A commitment is your guarantee that you will adhere to your plan, even when it would be easier or more pleasurable to defect. If you fail to honor your guarantee, you've made a liar out of yourself, and future guarantees will be worth less. Making a commitment is like making a bet. If you adhere to it, you win, and your willpower is enhanced. If you don't do what you're committed to do, you lose. And what you lose is your belief in the power of your commitment. So let me tell you a story about committing your future behavior. In a different era, Odysseus had to sail within earshot of the sirens. No sailor could resist their seductive call. The penalty for giving in to this irresistible temptation was death by drowning, the fate experienced by all who had come before. Appreciating the danger, Odysseus filled his men's ears with wax so they would not be able to hear the sirens. Odysseus, he wanted to hear what the sirens sounded like, but he knew that if he did, he'd be unable to resist their temptation. His heroic solution: Odysseus pre-committed his future behavior by ordering his men to tie him to the mast of the ship. The plan was successful. When the ship sailed past the island, the sirens called, but the men couldn't hear it, and so they kept rowing. Odysseus heard the sirens, but could not give in to the temptation, because he was bound to the mast. Now there are 4 lessons for you in this story. First, Odysseus made his plans in advance. If he would have waited until he heard the sirens call to try to figure out what to do, it would have been too late. And he knew that once he heard their voices, he would have been transformed from a potent warrior to a helpless victim. You would do well to use Odysseus's humility as a model. Understand this: when you encounter a high-risk situation, you will not have the strengths that are available to you now, and you are not likely to come up with an effective response during the crisis. To succeed at this remarkably difficult challenge, you must have a well-planned and well-rehearsed coping tactic already in place. The second lesson is, Odysseus filled his men's ears with wax, so they couldn't hear the sirens. To the extent that you're able to, engineer your environment to minimize your exposure to temptation. Avoid high-risk situations and high-risk people, at least until you've strengthened your healthy habits. The third lesson: because no sailor ever survived the temptation of the sirens, some might take a defeatist attitude and passively accept the inevitable loss. But Odysseus was a hero. He had high self-efficacy, and so he approached the challenge as a problem to be solved. He devised a good plan and executed it well. And now for the most important lesson of this group. Even though Odysseus experienced irresistible temptation, he didn't give in to it. Why not? how did he achieve the good outcome? Odysseus' solution to irresistible temptation was to pre-commit his future behavior by having himself bound by strong rope. Likewise, you can pre-commit your future behavior by being bound by your word. For example, you can say something like, I'm not experiencing temptation now, but I know that I will. And I give my word that no matter what happens, I'll keep my distance from the incentive. Willpower refers to your ability to adhere to your commitment despite the influence of local stressors and temptations. Willpower is the strength of the binds that hold you to your commitment, despite the influence of local conditions that would motivate you to do otherwise. Since a commitment is like a bet, you can increase your willpower by taking the bet and winning. However, be careful. One loss overcomes many victories. As is the case with bets, it would be foolish to make a bet that you cannot win in your lifetime. For example, I'll never have another cigarette. You do not get to win that one until you're dead. The point of making a bet is to win. A commitment such as, I will stay sober today, is winnable. A particularly useful version of this kind of commitment is the delay tactic. I don't know about later, but I give my word that I will stay clean for the next hour. Naturally, this does not mean that you'll use in an hour. If you still wanted to use at the end of the hour, you can make another hour commitment to stay clean. The point of this tactic is that you guarantee that you will not use now. Since there is no possibility of using now because you staked your word on it, you can forget it. There's no longer a decision to think about. The power of this method is that once you kill the option to use now, there is nothing to think about, so you can forget it. And once your attention is off it, it loses its power to motivate you. Now you understand what is at risk when you make a commitment. The pig says, you're all talk, and when push comes to shove, you'll fold. You can make any commitment you choose, and the pig bets you won't honor it. What is at stake is your reputation with yourself. If you honor your word, you win the wager. And what you win is the belief that you will do what you say you will do. If you fail to honor your word, the pig wins. That is, you lose the power of your will, and your actions become dependent on external sources of control. As you can see, this is a dangerous strategy. If you lose, it would have been better if you did not take the bet. So if you decide to use this approach, be aware of what you're getting into. If you commit to something, you have to do exactly what you said you would do. No exceptions, no matter how reasonable it may seem at the moment. It is best to make short, time-limited commitments, like 15 minutes or an hour. The penalties for failure are so enormous that it is simply too dangerous to make long-term commitments, like, I'll never use the incentive again. The pig's wager is one of several strategies you could use to escape an addictive trap. Of all of these strategies, the pig's wager is the only one that's dangerous. If you choose it and fail to honor your word, you do serious damage to your future ability to control your incentive use. I describe the pig's wager in detail not because I recommend it to you. There may be other approaches that are a better match to your personal attributes. It is important that you understand the dimension of willpower versus powerlessness. Repeatedly losing the pig's bet is a stunning and demoralizing experience. It's understandable that those who do feel powerless and out of control. However, I found that many of my clients have the cognitive faculties to regain control over their appetites once they understand what they're up against. For them, treatment programs which emphasize admitting powerlessness over a disease and complying with a plan developed by an external source of control, such as treatment providers or a support group, does more harm than good. Recovering from an incentive use disorder is not easy, but it's not impossible. If you have good mental faculties, you can dramatically enhance your ability to act in accord with your interest and principles, despite the stresses and temptations that would motivate you to defect. You now know one strategy: voluntarily taking the pig's wager. If you are well matched with it, it's the only strategy you'll need. The downside is that it's a dangerous strategy, and you may be better matched with a different approach. So if you have any doubt about adhering to your commitment, now consider your history. I strongly recommend that you follow the link to the Trap Detector self-test, which will help you select a strategy best matched to your personal attributes. What I'm about to tell you over the next 20 minutes or so was acquired over 40 years as a psychologist, helping people with all sorts of addictive disorders get out of their various traps.